بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين أما بعد. My dear respected brothers, elders, sisters in Islam, we greet you with the greetings we hope to hear on the day of judgment when we say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We thank Allah who has gathered and guided us here unto this very auspicious moment, and that is the moment where we have developed the deepest wisdom available to man. And that is the wisdom to put our forehead on the ground in sajda to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. I bear witness and testify, if it is my last permitted act, that there is no one worthy of our worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one worthy of our praise or devotion except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whosoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides, that person can never go astray. Whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves to his own devices, well, for Allah, that man will forever be lost. As to what follows, next week we know, I don't know the exact date, but next week we know, inshallah, that we will be entering the month of Ramadan. We know that in the middle of the hottest part of the year, the longest days of the year, in the middle of summer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed fasting on us, as He says in the Holy Quran, as He has prescribed fasting on those before us, that we may learn restraint. That we may learn restraint. I wish to spend this khutbah on the subject of Ramadan and its relationship to the entire Muslim way of life. Because you see, the idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribes fasting on us that we may learn restraint, it is not that we may have learned restraint for 30 days. So what we have done with this deen, and the reason why Islam is individually and collectively where it is in modern life, is because we take the rituals of Islam and we try to do the minimum. So for example, the idea of restraint, what does it mean? It means we don't speak ill of other people. It means we don't backbite. It means we don't use bad language. It means we don't drink astaghfirullah. We should not be drinking in the first place. But we don't even drink water or anything like that. We don't smoke, astaghfirullah, we shouldn't be smoking in the first place. We don't eat food, which is allowed to us. We don't even do that during the time. But is it that after 30 days that we go back to using bad language, that we go back to backbiting, that we go back to losing our temper with other people, that we go back to all of these things that we stopped in the month of Ramadan? Is it that in the month of Ramadan we come to the mosque ideally 5 times a day, possibly even for Taraweeh or Qiyamul Layl, and then after the month of Ramadan is over, we never see the inside of a mosque? Is it that the entire Muslim community in the city of Toronto may populate the CNE or other places to pray Eid prayer, which is not compulsory, although it's a good thing people do it, and yet Jummah prayer, which is compulsory, a lot of the same people don't come? So it is that fasting in the month of Ramadan is meant to teach us what is possible in this way of life. And what is possible in this way of life has to be viewed like a staircase. Every time you take one step up, you should never go down below the step you have already taken. And at the end of this staircase is the companionship and the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the goal of all the Muslims. But for too many people, Ramadan is not like a staircase that steps upwards. Ramadan is more like that exercise you see people do in a gym, where they step on the stair and then they come off the stair as soon as they can. They step up on the stair, they come off the stair. After 20 years, they've taken 20 steps up and 20 steps back down again. Or a little bit like that science experiment you see with the hamster running on the wheel. The hamster runs on the wheel, he gets up a little high, the wheel comes back down, he's right back in the place that he started. For too many people, this is what the practice of this deen and of any religion has become. You know, for the Christians, Christian brothers and sisters in humanity, they go to church on Sunday, they're well dressed, they listen to everything the priest has to say, the father, the pastor, whatever they call him. As soon as they step outside, turn the other cheek is gone. Love thy neighbor as you love thyself is gone. You know, all of that is gone. 1 day a week, fine. 6 days a week, no problem. So the Muslim, he prays, he's very clean, he's very polite in the mosque, he shakes everybody's hand, he prays 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day. As soon as he leaves his prayer, he's out in the business world, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is forgotten. Get what you can from whoever you can as quickly as you can. Or he says La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah either in his prayer or when someone accepts Islam or before he eats a meal or something like this. And then the knowledge of Tawheed and what it means to his entire life is gone except when he says it. You see, the rituals of Islam are meant as reminders. Reminders of how every breath and every second of our life is supposed to be conducted. When we say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, we are not saying it once and then not repeating it again. We are saying it as an oath to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide every second of the rest of our lives. When we pray 5 times a day, it's meant to remind us for all the minutes that we're not praying, that every action we have is some kind of prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if done correctly. Eating with gratitude is some kind of prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Working honestly to help other people is some kind of prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Teaching somebody something is some kind of prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So yes, there is the compulsory 5 times daily prayer, but there is all the actions you perform in between those prayers, which are meant to remind you that we exist in this world as Muslims to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's it. So we could be working, we could be banking, we could be eating, we could be teaching, we could be studying. All of this, in addition to the prayers, is kind of like a prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is what the prayer is meant to remind us. So similarly, when we do zakat, zakat is meant to remind us that many of our actions are supposed to be some form of charity towards somebody else. That our lives are not just for ourselves. If we have nothing, we smile to somebody else. That's a form of charity. If we have children or wives or friends, and we give them something, maybe it's money, maybe it's the help of our hands, maybe it's our thinking and our brains, maybe it's our positive emotion, all of this is also zakat. So there is the zakat that you pay once a year, but that zakat is meant to remind you of the zakat you should do all throughout the year. And people say, what about Hajj? Hajj is about a journey to a place where all people are equal, regardless of skin color, wealth, race, anything. They're all equal. They all wear the same clothing. They're all there for the same purpose, to do tawaf and to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can't tell who is the prime minister and who is the poorest beggar. It's a journey to a place where there is a perfect brotherhood of man. You think that is done once in a lifetime? Yes, that is done formally once in a lifetime. But informally, it is meant to remind us that when we're not in Mecca, we still have the opportunity to create that kind of world outside Mecca. So it is that fasting to teach us restraint. It's not simply to teach us restraint for a few hours or a few days. It is to teach us restraint towards the goals of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 365 days a year. If you have 3 meals a day for 335 days, that's 1,000 meals a year. Most of us, subhanAllah, have not missed a meal by force due to lack of ability of food in our entire lives. So if you're 40 years old, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided you 40,000 meals. You miss 1 or 2 in the month of Ramadan, and everybody says, oh, I'm a hero to himself for 30 days. 40,000 meals. How many meals have you provided to other people? How many meals have you provided to people who truly could not afford them? How much gratitude do you have for 40,000 meals if you're 40? Or 20,000 meals if you're 20? Or 60,000 meals? We don't think about these things. So fasting was prescribed to us to remind us, not only during the month of Ramadan, but after the month of Ramadan, of our everlasting connection to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just as La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah is not meant to be said once in someone's life, but it is meant to be a code that defines every aspect of your life the moment it's said. Just as praying 5 times a day is not meant that you would be pious for 10, 15 minutes 5 times a day, 75 minutes out of 24 hours in a day, but that you would be reminded constantly that what I'm saying, what I'm thinking, what I'm watching, what I'm doing, what I'm learning is all being measured by Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ask, does my servant truly pray to me? And does he know what this prayer is and what it means? We put our forehead on the ground to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and not to any man, not to any deity, not to any flag, not to any stone, because we acknowledge, just as we do when we say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, that there is only one standard that governs us in life. And that is the answer to a very simple question. Would God want me to do this? Would God want me to say this? Would God want me to think this? Would God be happy with me if I treated someone in this way and I asked him permission in advance? If I said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in advance, this is what I'm going to do. Am I doing the right thing? What would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? Most of us, we know the answer. We know the answer. We know the answer. We know it is true, and I've said before many times in many khutbahs, that in one Muslim country alone that produces oil, the taxes on this oil are more than $1 billion a day. And I've said many times before that serious people have studied how much money it would take to feed and provide medicine for preventable diseases to every poor person in the world, and the answer is $13 billion a year. Maybe they're off by 10-15%. But think about this. If one Muslim country, forget all of them, one Muslim country gave up, showed restraint for its oil taxes for 13 days out of 365 in a year, there would be no person on earth, in Canada, America, Africa, Asia, anywhere, that went without food for the whole year. We're supposed to fast for 30 days, but our government, one government, cannot fast for 13, let alone all the Muslim governments of this world. Ask yourself this question. Would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be proud of that fact? Or would he say, ask us, well, I teach you to fast 30 days a year, so you can't come together for 13? And look at how many poor people there are. And where did this escape your eyes? It says in the Holy Quran, verily, on the Day of Judgment, we have lifted the veil from your sight, and now your eyes are keen. And now you can see the world as it actually is. Or perhaps as you knew it was, but shut your eyes when you weren't fasting, so that you were not aware of it. But when you're fasting in the sun, and you say to yourself, oh, my life is difficult, and I can't drink water, and I can't eat food, and I'm exhausted. Ask yourself how many days in a year you thought about people who do not have the option of iftar. People who live in refugee camps. People who live in countries where there's famine or flooding. People who live in places of war. People who have none of those problems but are simply too poor to be able to afford a meal. You and I, we have an option. At the end of iftar, at the end of fasting, we say our kalma, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then all of a sudden we eat again. And our pain is gone. And our memory of the hunger of 5 minutes ago is already erased. But there are people all around the world, and you know this and I know this, and many of us come from the countries where this is true, where this is not an option, where there is no kalma, and there is no food, and there is no knowledge of when the hour that food will come has emerged. There are many countries where there is no drinking water that is clean, and those countries are hot, where the water is needed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed fasting to us as He has prescribed fasting to those before us, as a constant reminder of our connectedness to the entire human condition. We may suffer for a day, 2 days, 30 days, whatever the days are that are hard for us, but there are people who suffer 365 days a year. And if the message of fasting is that your restraint cannot provide value for them, then you have lost the message of what this deen is. If your prayers 5 times a day during the month of Ramadan do not lead to prayers 5 times a day after the month of Ramadan, of what value has your Ramadan been to you? If you acknowledge that you really don't need as much as you think you do to be calm, to be happy, to be content, because fasting has taken away a lot of those things that you think you needed during the day, and you realize you don't need them after all as badly as you thought, then you're again like the hamster on the wheel, always staying in the same place, and not the man who is climbing a staircase every step towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our inevitable conclusion. So fasting is one example of one of the 5 pillars of Islam, but all of the 5 pillars of Islam are meant as reminders that Islam is not the religion of do the minimum. It's not the religion of fanaticism. It's not the religion of pray 100 times a day and don't talk to any human being, or live in a cave, or all of these kinds of things. It's not that religion. But it is also not the religion of, I do one ritual and then I'm fine. The ritual is meant to remind you, to cleanse your soul, to clear your mind, to lift the veil from your sight, so you may understand a deeper point about your relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this point is not just for you as a person, but for all of us as an ummah. Because fasting again reminds us that we are an ummah. Most of us, we come to the mosque, we pray Tarawih. So we see that there are other brothers who are as committed, if not more committed, subhanAllah, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than us. We see these brothers every day. We smile, we shake hands, we ask them how they are, we get to know them. Ramadan comes and goes, we forget their names, we forget their situations, we don't know about them anymore in the way that we once did. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought us together that we could know people who love Him as much as or more than we do, so that these people could lift us up, so these people could inspire us with their stories, so the sacrifices these people make would cause us to make more sacrifices in the way of this deen. And so it is that Ramadan illustrates that we are connected, that the condition of the worst of us is the accountability of the best of us, in anything, in education, in health, in food, in economics, in deen, in taqwa, in happiness. How can one brother be happy, very happy, when his brother in the masjid is sad? If he doesn't feel some kind of, what is wrong with this brother? What has happened? What can I do to help him? His happiness is the happiness of an animal. So it is that we are connected to each other, and Ramadan reminds us of this connection. So it is that the condition of the poorest person in our masjid is the condition of the richest person in our masjid.